1882. The world above the waves was calm, but far below, the Atlantic carried secrets darker than midnight. A sailor named Steven Callahan, dreamer engineer, and man of the sea set sail from the Canary Islands in a small boat named Napoleon Solo. He was chasing freedom, silence, and salt air, but what he found was isolation and madness, a 76-day descent into the raw edge of human endurance. Welcome, Steven Callahan's 76 Days Adrift, a tale where the ocean is not water, it's the devil himself, wearing the mask of blue infinity. The ocean was calm that morning, a mirror of glass stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The kind of stillness that feels sacred, as if the world itself is holding its breath. A lone man stood on the deck of a small sailboat, his eyes tracing the blue line where the sky met the sea. His name was Steven Callahan, a sailor and engineer, a dreamer who what happens when the ocean, vast, endless, and merciless, decides to claim you. When every sunrise is a reminder that no one is coming and every wave is a whisper that this might be your last day alive. Tonight, we unravel a story not of monsters, but of the sea itself, a living, breathing nightmare that tested one man's soul. This is not fiction. This is survival. Leave the ocean wasn't a place to fear, a world to understand. He had spent months preparing this voyage. Every rope, every tool, every grain of food carefully chosen. His vessel, 6.5-meter sailboat named Napoleon Solo, was small but sturdy, built with his own hands, crafted with precision and love. It wasn't just a boat, it was his companion, his shelter, his defiance against the vast unknown. For Steven, this wasn't a race or a record. It was a dialogue with nature, an attempt to test himself against the most powerful force on Earth, the sea. It was February of 1982 when he left the Canary Islands, compass pointing west toward the Caribbean. The sun shimmered on the water like molten gold, and the wind whispered promises of adventure. He felt alive, liberated from the noise of cities and the weight of human demands. Out here, there were no voices, no rules. Only the rhythm of waves and the hum of wind through the sails. He kept a journal, recording every detail, every thought. His handwriting was steady, his words filled with confidence. "I am free," he wrote on the second day. "The sea is my world now. Every wave is a friend, every sunrise a beginning." For a while, the journey was everything he imagined. The days glowed with sunlight, and the nights were a cathedral of stars. He could hear the ocean breathing, the wind sighing through the sails like a living thing. Dolphins swam beside his boat, and he spoke to them as if they understood. There was peace in his solitude, a calm that only the sea could offer. The ocean has a way of testing those who love it too much. On the seventh night, the wind began to shift. It started as a whisper, a low murmur rising from the distance. The waves changed tone, rolling with a deeper, heavier rhythm. Steven watched the horizon darken, clouds gathering like bruises across the sky. He checked his instruments, tightened ropes, adjusted sails. The air grew cold, sharp. The smell of salt turned bitter. He could feel it. Something was coming. By midnight, the storm was upon him. The sky split open with thunder. The wind screamed like a living creature. Napoleon Solo shuddered and groaned as the waves crashed higher and higher. Water poured over the deck. Steven fought the tiller, his knuckles white, his eyes wide. Every muscle strained to keep his boat upright. Lightning tore across the blackness, and for a second, he saw the full face of the sea, monstrous, infinite, and merciless. He shouted into the wind, but the storm devoured his voice. The boat tilted, slammed. The mast groaned under the weight of the storm. Hours passed in chaos, a blur of water, fear, and exhaustion. Then a sound, sharp and final, the sound of something breaking. He turned and saw the hull split open, water rushing in like a beast unleashed. His heart stopped. The ocean was coming for him. He scrambled for supplies, his hands shaking, his mind racing. He grabbed a small emergency bag, flares, a spear gun, some food. The boat lurched again, the floor rising beneath his feet. He could feel the sea swallowing it whole. The sails were gone, ripped apart. The ropes tangled like veins of a dying creature. His life was seconds from being pulled under. He dragged his inflatable life raft into the water, the cold hitting him like knives. The waves tossed him around, throwing him between fragments of his sinking boat. He clung to the raft, kicking, gasping, coughing salt water. When he finally pulled himself in, he lay there trembling, the world spinning. In the darkness, he could still hear the last groans of Napoleon Solo as it slipped beneath the waves. The sound of his creation dying. The storm moved on, leaving behind only silence. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it consumes. Steven looked around. No lights, no land, just the black emptiness of the Atlantic stretching endlessly in every direction. He was alone, his supplies, meager. His radio, gone. His body, bruised and freezing. He tried to steady his breathing, forcing calm into his chest. He knew panic was death. He'd been a sailor long enough to understand that survival begins with the mind. But as he lay there, the realization began to seep in, slow and heavy. No one knew he was here. No one knew his boat was gone. Above him, the clouds broke apart, revealing a cold moon hanging over the water, pale and indifferent. He whispered to himself, maybe to God, maybe to the ocean. His breath came out in mist. He said, "All right, it's just you and me now." The sea gave no answer, only the quiet slap of waves against rubber. And in that hollow, endless dark, the ocean waited, silent, watching, patient. The storm had left him floating in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, a lone figure in a small yellow life raft, the kind meant for hours of rescue waiting, not weeks of survival. The world around him was quiet now, almost mocking in its peace. The horizon stretched in every direction, an endless desert of blue that looked beautiful, until you realized it wanted you dead. Steven Callahan sat hunched, water dripping from his hair, his lips trembling from the cold. His raft rocked gently on the dark water, each movement whispering that the ocean was not done with him yet. The smell of salt was thick in the air, burning his eyes, his throat. He reached into the small survival bag he'd saved from his sinking boat. A few crackers, solar still to collect water, a signaling mirror flares, and a tiny fishing spear. That was all. That was everything that stood between him and the deep. He checked his body for injuries. His ribs ached, his hands were cut, his feet raw from the cold water. His muscles screamed with exhaustion, but he knew he couldn't rest. The raft had to be checked, the seams inspected, the leaks patched. Even one small tear could mean death. As he worked, his thoughts raced. No one knew he was out here. His voyage had been solo, untracked, unmonitored. He was a ghost drifting across the Atlantic, unseen, unknown, forgotten. He looked around, hoping for a ship, a plane, but there was nothing, only the sun, burning harshly above him, as if to test what was left of his strength. Time lost meaning. There was only light and dark, heat and cold, thirst and pain. By the second day, hunger began to gnaw at him. He tried to eat small pieces of food to conserve what little he had. He counted each item carefully, whispering to himself like a ritual. 7 crackers, 3 chocolate bars, a few cans of water. That was it. His lifeline was measured in crumbs. He began trying to collect rainwater using his solar still, a clear dome that used sunlight to evaporate seawater and condense drinkable drops. It worked, barely. He collected only a few sips a day, but it was enough to keep him conscious. He learned quickly that thirst was worse than hunger. The dryness cracked his lips, burned his tongue, every swallow into agony. At night, the ocean changed its voice. It no longer roared, it whispered. The waves slapped the raft rhythmically, as if trying to lull him into madness. The stars were bright and cruel, shining indifferently over his suffering. Sometimes he'd stare at them, whispering questions to the sky. Why me? How long can I last? There was no answer, only the slow, eternal pulse of the sea. Days blurred together. His beard grew coarse, his skin burned and peeled from the salt. He learned to fish, using his small spear, stabbing at the shadows beneath him. Sometimes he succeeded, catching a small dorado or flying fish that leapt too close to his raft. He ate them raw, the taste of blood and salt mixing in his mouth. It was survival, nothing more. But survival has a cost. By the 3rd week, his body had begun to fail him. His legs cramped, his stomach twisted with pain. His eyes hollowed, his cheeks sunken. He began to hallucinate. Flashes of land on the horizon, voices calling his name, the shape of his boat rising from the waves. Sometimes he thought he saw his reflection in the water, smiling at him when he wasn't. He started talking to the sea, to his raft, to invisible companions. "You won't have me?" he would whisper to the waves. Not yet. The sun became both his tormentor and his only light. It bleached the world into colorless pain. He shielded his eyes with his hands, feeling the blisters on his skin break open. Salt water stung the wounds, and he'd grit his teeth until tears mixed with the sweat on his face. At night, the temperature dropped so sharply that he'd shiver violently, hugging himself, whispering stories to stay awake. He thought of his family, of home, of warmth, but those memories felt like dreams now, fragile and far away. Sharks began circling his raft. Their fins sliced through the water in lazy arcs, silent and patient. They seemed to sense his weakness, waiting for the moment when he might fall in. Steven watched them closely, fear and fascination tangled in his mind. Sometimes at night, their tails brushed the underside of the raft, a reminder that he was never truly alone. A few times he saw ships, or thought he did. Faint silhouettes on the horizon, blinking lights that filled him with hope. He waved his mirror, fired flares, screamed until his voice broke. But the ships never turned, never saw him. The realization hit hard each time in this endless ocean. A single man was invisible. He started to lose track of days. His watch had stopped. He marked time by the rhythm of the sun and the moon. His dreams became strange, memories mixed with fantasies. He saw green fields and heard laughter, only to wake up with salt water in his mouth. He began to wonder if rescue would ever come, or if he was destined to fade quietly into the sea's endless memory. His journal, soaked and half destroyed, still floated beside him in a plastic bag. He wrote when he could, when his hands were steady enough to hold the pencil. Still alive, one entry read, still here. Each word was a battle cry, a declaration to the ocean that he existed, that he mattered. The days stretched on, cruel and quiet. The raft became his world, a fragile island adrift in the void. And as the sun rose on yet another nameless morning, Steven Callahan looked out across the horizon, wondering how much longer he could keep fighting the silence, the thirst, and the slow, creeping weight of the sea's eternal hunger. The days no longer felt like days. They were stretches of light and dark that bled into one another, a slow drowning in time itself. Steven Callahan's world had shrunk to the size of a 6-foot raft. The ocean had taken everything else. His boat, his comfort, his sense of safety, and now it wanted his mind. But something in him refused to give in. He was a sailor, an engineer, a man who believed problems could be solved if you just kept thinking, kept fighting, kept breathing. His raft, once bright yellow, was now faded and scarred from the sun. The edges cracked, the seams groaned under pressure. Each morning, he checked for leaks, patching holes with tape, glue, anything that could hold against the relentless salt water. The ocean was patient. It didn't need to strike fast. It only needed to wait. But Steven learned to wait too. He was adapting to its rhythm, to its cruelty. He began to ration everything with mathematical precision. Every sip of water, every bite of fish, every drop of energy mattered. His solar stills, delicate plastic domes that turned seawater into drinkable drops, became his lifeline. He guarded them like treasure, adjusting them daily to catch the maximum sunlight. Some days they worked, others they failed, leaving him to suck moisture from fish eyes or lick condensation off the raft's walls. Survival was no longer about strength. It was about cleverness, about knowing how to stay alive one more hour, then one more day. He learned the language of the sea. He watched the clouds to predict rain, the waves to sense weather. He studied the movements of birds, knowing they meant land was somewhere far away. The ocean was no longer just an enemy. It was a teacher, harsh but wise. And through that strange bond, Steven began to change. His skin, burned and cracked, was now leathery and dark. His beard was wild, his body skeletal. His eyes had sunk deep into his face, but they still burned with a quiet, stubborn light. Some mornings, he would wake with his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth, his body shaking from dehydration. He would whisper to himself over and over, "Stay calm, stay awake, stay alive." It became his prayer, his mantra, his heartbeat. When his mind wandered toward despair, he forced it back. He repaired the raft again, sharpened his spear, checked the stills. Busy hands left no room for hopelessness. He learned to fish more efficiently, catching small dorados and flying fish. Sometimes, he even managed to trap birds that landed to rest on the raft. Their meat was tough and raw, but it kept him alive. He used their bones as tools, their feathers as bait. The ocean provided, but it demanded pain in return. Every catch was a struggle, every victory small but sacred. His dreams became vivid and strange. He saw green trees swaying in the wind, heard the voices of people calling his name, smelled bread baking. Then he'd wake, surrounded by nothing but endless blue, the sounds of the waves echoing like laughter. Hallucinations blurred the line between reality and imagination. Once, he saw lights in the distance, a ship, he thought. He waved frantically, fired his last flare, screamed until his throat tore. The ship passed by, distant and blind. He watched it fade into the horizon, his hope bleeding away with the light. That night, he cried for the first time, not from fear, but from the crushing loneliness. Out here, there were no rules, no clocks, no mercy. Only survival. He looked at the sky, thousands of stars shimmering above, and realized how small he was, how fragile life really is when the world stops caring whether you live or die. But even as he faced that realization, something inside him hardened. The same mind that had built his boat began to rebuild his will. He started tracking his drift, marking the stars, estimating his position. He believed he was moving west, pushed slowly by the trade winds toward the Caribbean. That thought became his anchor, invisible but strong enough to keep him sane. By the 14th day, he was a shadow of himself. His muscles trembled, his voice was a rasp, his instincts were sharper than ever. He could sense storms before they appeared, smell rain before it fell. The sea had stripped him of everything unnecessary. All that was left was a man reduced to pure willpower. One afternoon, while repairing a small puncture in the raft, sudden movement below caught his attention. A shark, massive and silent, brushed the bottom of the raft with its fin. The rubber flexed under the weight. Steven froze, his hands trembling. The shark circled again, curious, patient. It bumped the raft once more, and for a moment Steven thought it was over. But then, drifted away uninterested, almost respectful. He stared after it, his heart pounding. The ocean had tested him again and let him live. Each day became a ritual of endurance. He woke with the sunrise, repaired his gear, hunted for food, collected water, prayed for rescue. He marked each sunset like a small victory, whispering to the waves that he had survived another day. Sometimes, dolphins swam beside him, and he felt a strange comfort in their company. They were proof that there was still life out here, something beyond struggle, beyond fear. He started speaking aloud again, to the dolphins, to the raft, to the sea itself. His voice, hoarse and cracked, echoed across the water. "Not today," he'd say. "You won't take me today." He didn't know who he was talking to anymore. God, fate, the ocean, or himself. But the words gave him strength. The days blended together, the horizon unchanged, the silence endless. Yet somehow, against every law of nature, Steven Callahan endured. He was no longer just surviving the ocean. He was becoming part of it. His mind was tuned to its rhythm, his body molded by its will. Every beat of his heart was in sync with the slow, ancient pulse of the sea. And as the 45th sunrise burned red over the Atlantic, his eyes opened once more to the same horizon that had both cursed him and kept him alive. The sun blazed above, and the endless shimmer of the Atlantic stretched in every direction. For Steven Callahan, days had long stopped having names. Each sunrise was simply another test, another battle against a world of salt, sun, and silence. He was a shadow of the man who had set sail weeks ago. His beard hung thick, his ribs pressed against his skin, and his eyes, once bright with adventure, had dimmed into the dull glow of survival. Every morning, Steven opened his eyes unsure if he had truly slept or merely drifted in and out of consciousness. The sound of waves slapping against the raft had become his lullaby and his torment. His raft, patched, stained, and deflated at the corners, was barely holding on, just like him. The food had almost run out, and the water he collected from the rain was growing scarce. He had learned to eat raw fish and tiny barnacles, tearing them apart with trembling hands. His hands now leathery and cracked, moved with mechanical precision. His mind too tired to think, his body too weak to care. Even then, he refused to give up. Every sunrise was a small rebellion, a whisper to the sea that he still lived. Steven knew that if he stopped trying, if he let despair take over, the ocean would consume him whole. He had survived storms, sharks, and hunger. He could not let his mind drown before his body did. The days blurred into weeks. His raft drifted endlessly, carried by the invisible currents of the Atlantic. He had stopped counting after day 60. The only thing that mattered now was endurance. He spoke to himself, to the stars, to the fish that swam beneath him. He gave names to the creatures, imagined conversations with them. Loneliness had become his only companion, and he clung to it desperately. Because without it, there was only madness. One morning, the dawn cracked open the horizon. He saw something, faint, distant, impossible. It looked like the outline of a ship. His heart pounded in disbelief. How many times had he seen mirages? How many times had hope turned to dust before his eyes? He rubbed his eyes, blinked, stared again. The shape remained. It was real. His shaking hands reached for the flare gun, one of his last, and he fired it into the sky. The red streak cut through the soft morning light, vanishing in seconds. No response. He screamed, waved his arms, blew his whistle until his lungs ached. The ship moved slowly, too slowly. Maybe it hadn't seen him. Maybe it was turning away. Panic surged through him. He fired another flare. The smoke burned his eyes, but he didn't care. He screamed louder, his voice cracking into raw, broken sounds. He saw movement. The ship was turning. Tears mixed with salt water on his cheeks as he watched a small boat lower into the sea. The figures aboard it rode closer, their shapes becoming clearer. He was hallucinating, he thought. It had to be another cruel trick of the sea. But then he heard voices, real voices. When the rescuers reached him, Steven could barely move. He was half-conscious, his body barely recognizable as human. His first words were a whisper, something between a laugh and a sob. They pulled him aboard, covered him with a blanket, and gave him fresh water. The taste of it, clean, cool, was overwhelming. His body trembled as he drank, the tears coming uncontrollably. After 76 days adrift, he was no longer a ghost of the ocean. He was alive. As the ship carried him to safety, Steven stared at the sea one last time. It looked peaceful now, innocent even. But he knew better. The ocean had been his greatest enemy and his harshest teacher. It had stripped him of everything. his strength, his pride, his sanity. And yet it had given him something in return, a truth about life itself. He had seen death in every wave, every night, every hunger pang that twisted his stomach. But in that struggle, he found something more powerful than fear, the unyielding will to live. When Steven finally stepped onto land, his legs buckled. The ground felt strange, foreign, like it no longer belonged to him. People gathered around, offering food, warmth, and kindness. Their words blurred together. One thing was clear: he had become a symbol of survival. Newspapers would call it a miracle. But Steven knew it wasn't divine intervention that had saved him. It was persistence. It was the human spirit refusing to break. He would later write his story in his book Adrift, 76 Days Lost at Sea, not as a tale of heroism, as a testament to endurance. He spoke of the hallucinations, the hunger, the madness, the things no one could understand unless they had faced the endless blue abyss themselves. In interviews, people asked him if he had been afraid. He would smile faintly and say, "Of course, but fear keeps you alive." The Atlantic had almost claimed him, but he had emerged stronger, stripped bare of everything but the core truth of existence. That life, in its rawest form, is a battle between hope and despair. Steven Callahan's story isn't just about survival at sea. It's about the fragile line between man and nature, between hope and surrender. It's a reminder that even when everything is lost, as long as you breathe, as long as your heart still beats, you have not yet been defeated. And somewhere, deep in the waves of the Atlantic, the ocean still remembers the man who drifted for 76 endless days and refused to let go. Steven Callahan's 76 Days Adrift remind us that true strength isn't found in comfort, but in the moments when the world abandons you and you refuse to abandon yourself. His survival teaches that even when hope seems to vanish beneath endless waves, human spirit, anchored by courage, patience, and faith, can defy the impossible. No matter how vast the storm or how small the raft, it's persistence that keeps us alive when everything else is lost.